Well, hello there, and welcome to Roundtable. I'm your host, Adam Cook. On this week's show, we have several topics from several different interview subjects. Many of them come from the Richmond Municipal Council table, but you're also going to hear from Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau and Nova Scotia's Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs, Colton LeBlanc, about new measures that have been introduced to recruit healthcare professionals for Acadian and Mi'kmaq communities. Later on in the program, we have an excerpt from a special presentation based on Fraud Prevention Month. We're going to hear from Richmond RCMP Constable Jeff Pierre about how you can respond if you feel you've been the victim of a scam on the phone or on the internet. But we begin with a problem that comes up at the Richmond Council table regularly at this time of year: snow removal. Concerns brought up about snow clearing by public works crews in Isle Madame and other parts of Richmond County has led councillors to demand a meeting with local public works crews, but also to reach out to Nova Scotia's Minister of Public Works, Kim Maslin. Here's some of the conversation from last week's regular meeting of Richmond Municipal Council concerning snow removal in our area and what the council feels should be done about it.
The committee discussed provincial snow removal. I move that Council accept the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole that staff request a meeting of Council and the Department of Public Works in our region to discuss concerns regarding provincial snow clearing, and further move that the Warden draft a letter listing our concerns to the Minister of Transportation.
Well, can you describe basically why you feel it's important to not only have the local departments here, but also the ministers here?
Well, I think this is really in many ways about relationship building. We need to have a better understanding of what's happening, I think, on the ground at a very much a staff level. But also, I think we are all interested in hearing from the minister on the direction that she sees the Department of Public Works moving forward with regards to snow clearing and that kind of maintenance. It's creating such a safety concern on many of our rural roads. Especially, I will say, completely understanding of the fact that we had an extraordinary snow event not long ago, an extraordinary freeze event not long ago. So we know that there are some extreme circumstances that the department is dealing with, but I think we're just hearing so much from residents that we need to have a better understanding of what the department is thinking in terms of dealing with these types of extreme events.
Now, much conversation happening once again. This is not the first time that you and your council have dealt with this on the staggered clearing of specific roads. That 100 series highways go first, then it's the secondary roads, and then some people are not getting plowed out until about 24 hours afterwards. District 1 Councillor Sean Sampson mentioning at Committee of the Whole last week, this is keeping, for example, people from being able to get to their shifts at the Clearwater plant in Capoguet. Your thoughts on whether this staggering is working or not working, and how big a conversation that'll be should you be able to get a meeting with the minister?
Oh, it will definitely be a big part of the conversation. I think as you get into more rural areas, there are fewer and fewer of the major type of highways, right? And so I think our conversation really needs to be focused on, is the staggering working for rural municipalities like ours? Is there enough equipment? Is there enough people? And certainly we're all well aware that there's a people challenge with recruitment and retention of employees all across the province in every sector. But these are the kinds of things we need to understand, right? So that's really why we want to have that conversation, is it really have a broad picture of politically, like what is the minister kind of intending to, how is she intending to move the department forward, and then at a staff level, what are the challenges they face. We're really approaching this from more of a safety perspective than a convenience one. We all know it takes time to clear the snow off of these rural roads. We get that, but when we start to get into 24 plus hours, it becomes really difficult for people to feel safe in their homes, especially whereas Richmond County has one of the most aging populations in the province. If there are lots of folks out there who are vulnerable for a variety of reasons, and so these are just some of the concerns we need to bring forward.
So now you've heard what Richmond Municipal Council wants to do about snow clearing in the county. What does Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau feel about all this, and does he feel it's necessary to speak to the Public Works Minister for the province, Kim Maslin? Here's part of an interview that I had with Trevor Boudreau just last week. Can you give me some thoughts about the conversations you've had with members of council about this topic and where we go from here?
Yeah, no, certainly I think members of Richmond Council, along, I would say rural Nova Scotia in general. We hear from residents about snow removal and maintenance of roads all the time, and it's important to note, like, there are guidelines and standards that have been in place for a number of years, and those standards typically, if they're not being followed or responded to, certainly there's a contact center to call for residents, but also reach out to your MLA or your councillors to kind of just get that point across. It's important that we follow those standards, and certainly, from my understandings from councillors, from conversations with some of the councillors, is they're concerned about how that's approached, and I think it's reasonable for them to request information as to why this is the approach that the province has always taken, and certainly I would be happy to sit in on those meetings to make sure that council is aware of why the decisions are, and if council has suggestions for improvement, I think it's important for them to be able to voice those. And so, in terms of a request to meet with the minister, I would say that the process is they would request that, and certainly I would say whether it's the minister or executive staff, whether it's the deputy minister and chief engineer who come down and have a conversation, it's good to have conversations about the challenges that we see in our area. So I think those are positive things, and I think when they're able to have those conversations, it's a good thing, because it allows for different concerns and options to be heard. So I certainly appreciate the concerns that council hear, and certainly my office is no stranger to those as well. And I would say I do give credit to the operators who are working very hard in sometimes very difficult circumstances, whether it's in the middle of a storm or sometimes after a storm, and our winters aren't what they used to be. So it's not like we get snow, we get a frozen base starting in November and it lasts till March. Like, this up and down weather patterns do change sometimes how we're able to manage that. So there are challenges, but with every challenge there's an opportunity. So certainly, I've kind of heard from councillors, and we'll continue to kind of advocate and support that they have their voices heard. So.
And it's worth pointing out, too, for the benefit of our viewers, that the first time that Richmond councillors and the current council brought this issue up, it was 2 years ago. There was a different government in place and there was a different MLA in place. So it's not like either you or your government suddenly said, we're going to change the rules. These have been in place for quite a while. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there are standards in place and there's reasons, I believe, for it. Do the reasons still exist? These are good conversations to have, but I would suggest, 100 series highways are typically the ones that are open first, and there's certainly reasons for that. And my conversations with the department has always been like, if there's an emergency that needs to be that needs to be dealt with, they will get their equipment there as soon as they can to open up for an emergency. So those are some of the concerns that I have as well, but the conversations have been very positive with the department locally to say, hey, we'll do what we can to make sure if there's an emergency, we can get there. So I think some of the councillors have highlighted that as well. And but again, discussions are never a bad thing. It provides context and how everybody's feeling and how do we move forward. So.
Yeah. One last question on this, Trevor. Discussions are never a bad thing. And I know you've spoken to municipal councillors and you've spoken to local crews. Have you had any discussions, either formal or informal, on this topic with Minister Kim Masland or with senior engineers within the Department of Public Works?
I would say that the conversations happen on a global level, with all MLAs. I think there's a provincial, there's a desire provincially, to see what are the opportunities with respect to roads and maintenance and that sort. So those dialogues continue to happen all the time. And whenever I hear concerns, whether it's on roads or healthcare or whatever, I try to have conversations just saying, here's what I'm hearing on the ground. Here's what, the community is saying to me, so that when you're making decisions, take a look at these types of things. And the ministers have always been very responsive to that.
We'll hear more from Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau on another topic in just a couple of minutes. But right now, let's return to the Richmond Council chambers for another winter-related question. Specifically, what should the county do in terms of setting up and promoting comfort centers during times of heavy winter weather that often leads to power outages? For the answer, we spoke to Amanda Mumberket, the warden of the county, following last week's regular meeting of Richmond Council. You launched a discussion just a week ago at Committee of the Whole about comfort centres and the idea that when comfort centres are set up that everybody needs to know about them. I know the county is still trying to put together, working with its emergency management coordinator, Steve Marcellus, a concrete policy on comfort centres and when they're open and when they're not. What are your thoughts on the need to be able to tie all this together?
Yeah, no, it's essential. This is really part of the emergency management planning that I know we've had a priority on for some time. I will say, we've had great relationships. I think the county in general has for many, many years with local community halls. However, we feel we're at a point where we need to formalize some of these agreements so that, they know what we need to expect of them, but then they should know what to expect of us as well. And so things like, if is there a need for an emergency overnight shelter? Well, maybe many of our community halls are not prepared and not set up for that kind of service. So what do those processes look like? We want to make sure that it doesn't result in undue hardship, either financially or on the backs of volunteers for our community halls. So that's something we're keeping in mind as well, because we so value the service that they do provide. So,
is there some confusion right now as to who makes the call as to whether a shelter is opened up, whether it's the municipality, whether it's EMC, whether it's the community organization themselves? Is there a coherent agreement on that at this point?
Yeah, so I don't think it's really, I don't think it's confusing about who makes the call for an official comfort center or emergency shelter to be set up. I think where it gets confusing sometimes in the communication with the public is that sometimes community halls, because they're of community and run by community members, they'll open regardless, even if they don't have to, because sometimes these types of extreme events will create a need for some social cohesion, I guess, because people can feel very isolated and anxious in those situations, and maybe they don't have a generator or whatever the case may be. So some are opening ahead of time, which is fantastic. We encourage them to continue to do that as long as it's safe to do so. But we do need to kind of get a better handle on the communication around that. And I know one of my concerns with the last weather event, I don't know if it was the extreme cold or the snow, but one of my concerns was that I was starting to see people sharing information on social media about specific districts, which is fantastic because they live in those districts and that's really great. But we needed to do a better job of saying, okay, this is for this district, but click here to see the full comfort station list, because it was causing some confusion about their not being comfort stations in other districts, which wasn't the case. So we're trying to iron those little pieces out. It seems like a small thing, but in the event of an emergency, it's a big thing. Not every hall is at the same state of readiness. So this is what our emergency management coordinator is working on through policy, but also working directly with those groups to make sure that there is sort of a standard that we're helping everyone get to.
Now, as I mentioned off the top of the show, the provincial government recently introduced 2 measures revolving around healthcare professional recruitment. Specifically, how to bring in healthcare professionals to specifically serve in the Acadian and Mi'kmaq portions of the province. Of course, we have some of those right here in Richmond County, so I decided to speak to Nova Scotia's Minister of Acadian Affairs, Colton LeBlanc, about the Acadian portion of these measures. But first of all, let's return to our conversation with Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau to get his take on the idea of directing healthcare professional recruitment efforts specifically for Mi'kmaq communities, but also how the Provincial Department of Health is working with the 14-month-old Mi'kmaq Health Authority serving Nova Scotia. Here's my conversation with Trevor Boudreau right now. And now to talk about the provincial government's new directions in terms of healthcare professional recruitment for and within Mi'kmaq communities, we're pleased to welcome the MLA for Richmond, Trevor Boudreau. Trevor, thank you for joining us once again on Telile Community Television.
Once again, thanks for having me, Adam. It's always a pleasure, and looking forward to it.
No trouble at all. So we just got word a few days ago from the Department of Health and Wellness and from Minister Michelle Thompson that the provincial government is now going to direct some of its efforts in terms of healthcare professional recruitment towards Mi'kmaq communities. Obviously, you have one right in your riding, Boudreau First Nation. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing from this new direction and how you feel it could actually help in these communities and in the surrounding areas?
No, a good question, Adam, and I think it actually ties in quite nicely. I wouldn't say it's a new direction. I think our government's been pretty strong at suggesting and saying that like communities know their healthcare gaps and their needs better than anybody else. And so part of our strategy with retention and attraction has been about creating that new community fund, that $2 million fund, to say, okay, communities, what is it that you need to help support physicians, nurses, healthcare providers in your community, but also to help with attraction of new ones. And so again, community can be looked in a number of different ways. We can talk about Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health, which looks at the community of kind of Richmond and the Strait area. But community could be looked at a lot broader than that. And I think we can look at it as a Mi'kmaq community across the province and in the 13 First Nations communities, or with the Acadian community as well. So groups were allowed to apply for some of that funding. And we're very pleased, certainly, that the Mi'kmaq community and the Acadian Francophone community have applied to support, endeavors that would support, their communities as well.
Now, what have your conversations been like with officials from Boudreau First Nation and in other communities, possibly Waikama, possibly Poggenkek, just in terms of what the needs are in these communities and what specific needs there might be? What have your conversations been like in terms of your being the MLA representing Boudreau, but also in terms of your previous work as a town councillor in Port Hawkesbury with Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health? Basically, what are you hearing?
Yeah, good question again. And certainly our whether it's Boudreau or in Waikaba, where my wife is a pharmacist just in the neighboring community of Waikagama. So we have, her and I have certainly conversations, and we've had conversations with community members just about what their specific needs are. And part of it is a lot to do with people in the community getting access to care from others that are like from their community. And so one of the strong things we're hearing about is certainly, we want to see people who are from the community being healthcare providers in that community, or people who speak the same language or have common, backgrounds. And so these types of steps are going to allow those things to happen. And so having that ability to have healthcare provided appropriately in our communities is important. So, those are the types of conversations. Obviously, access to care globally is important to all our communities, but certainly the Mi'kmaq communities that my wife and I both have connections to would suggest just what I'm saying is having access to people who are from those communities. So
we are just 14 months removed from the establishment of a new health authority that specifically deals with Mi'kmaq communities. And I spoke to the CEO of that particular health authority here on Telile 24/7 about the need for Mi'kmaq health concerns and also cultural and language concerns to be met. Do you feel that this ties into this direction from the provincial government in terms of healthcare professional recruitment? And do you get the sense that this new health authority is involved in the conversation as well?
Absolutely. And I think what you're seeing in this specific request, so this was a request that that Dajigamik requested, along with trying to promote the nursing profession in the Mi'kmaq community. And so it's a great tool. They requested funding. They received all of the funding they requested for this initiative. And I think this is a really good first start to kind of see how we can support those communities, including the Mi'kmaq communities, to doing a better job of filling those gaps and finding those needs. So again, it's about retention and attraction of Mi'kmaq nurses in this particular project. But certainly, I think you'll see more to come from them as well.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing that. And I just wanted to get a general snapshot from you in terms of where we are in terms of healthcare professional recruitment in the Strait. We spoke about this topic in more detail just a few weeks ago, but it's always helpful to be able to get a general sense from you when we have you to be able to talk to about how you feel things are going along. What's your take on how the Healthcare Professionals Recruitment Office is doing and the Department of Health overall?
I think we're getting, that new department for retention and recruitment of healthcare providers is getting their feet under them now, and you're starting to see kind of some of that kind of happening, not only in this fund, but also just in terms of their approach to how they want to attract and retain, healthcare workers in our province. But certainly, I'm very hopeful and positive that there will be more to come, and certainly I feel like you're going to start seeing that trend of positive announcements and attraction and recruitment in the months to come. So I'm looking forward to it. I feel like the minister and her staff have really dug deep into it to identify what are the needs and how do they approach it. And you kind of have to do that at first. It's not just throw something on the wall and see if it sticks. You want to kind of also say, hey, how do we do this in the right manner? And I think full credit to the minister and the staff for doing that. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing where this goes. In the meantime, Trevor, we've covered a lot of ground, as we often do in these conversations, in just a short time. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about any of this just before we wrap up?
No, that's I think great conversations, and it's always a pleasure, Adam.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Trevor Boudreau, the MLA for Richmond, joining us via Zoom for Telile Community Television. Thanks again. And now, as promised, here is our interview with Colton LeBlanc, Nova Scotia's Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs and Nova Scotia's Minister responsible for La Francophonie. We're going to ask the Minister about new measures recently introduced by his government to bring in French-speaking healthcare professionals to serve in Acadian communities. Here's my conversation with Minister Colton LeBlanc right now. We wanted to talk to you about the specific announcement that came out just last week concerning healthcare professional recruitment and retention for Acadian communities across the province. Here in Isle-Madame, we of course have our Acadian culture, but can you tell me a little bit about what, from your perspective, these specific measures will do to be able to assist healthcare professional recruitment in these specific Acadian Francophone communities?
Our government understands and recognizes the value that the communities bring to recruiting healthcare professionals, and communities understand really the different challenges and also the opportunities that exist to welcome new professionals and newcomers as well to those regions. So that's why our government implemented this fund, the community fund, through the Office of Healthcare Professionals Recruitment. It's a $2 million fund that allows communities to apply for funding for different initiatives. And this is one of the elements of the recruitment and retention elements, the incentives that are outlined through our government's Action for Health plan to tackle the issues of recruitment and retention of our healthcare professionals in our province. So really happy that we can support communities through that fund. And Réseau Santé was one of those community organizations that submitted an application. I believe there was about 28 in the province. So Réseau Santé will be receiving, or has received, $73,000 from our provincial government to support the creation of a bilingual website in French and in English to really showcase our province and to show off, Nova Scotia for everything that it has, and to help answer the questions that healthcare professionals may have, but certainly focusing on the recruitment of mental health professionals in our province. And that's something that Réseau Santé has identified as a challenge, the access to mental health. So this is going to hopefully help address some of the challenges within that sector.
Now, is there, from your perspective, a perceived gap in the system? Are there blanks that need to be filled in, not just in mental health, as you mentioned, but in the healthcare system overall, in terms of French-speaking healthcare professionals? Have you been getting concerns at your office within the ministry? Have you been hearing it from different communities across the province? Is there a gap for French-speaking healthcare professionals in Nova Scotia at this time?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that even both Minister Thompson, so the Minister of Health and Wellness for our province, both her and I have met with Réseau Santé earlier in our mandate to hear from them some of the challenges and what are some of the priorities. So, to your point, even access to French healthcare professionals in our long-term care sector, for example, because we know that with time, I should say some patients that if they have dementia, that they go back to their first language. So some of these folks are their first language is French. So it's important to be able to maintain that dialogue and that communication for those folks as well. So we in our province we have a number of initiatives underway to recruit and retain healthcare professionals right across the healthcare sector. And this announcement here is going to help address some of those challenges.
Now, you mentioned Minister Thompson, and I note with some interest she is the MLA for Antigonish, which, of course, has a prominent Acadian community in terms of Pomket. Do you feel that she's sympathetic, not just because of that, but overall to the needs for more French language speaking healthcare professionals in the province?
Yeah, I gotta say, Minister Thompson brings a wealth of knowledge to our government as an RN herself, having had the opportunity to work on the front lines of in the healthcare sector, being an administrator in long-term care sector and a long-term care facility. So she understands very well the long-standing challenges and more so the opportunities that exist for transforming our healthcare system in Nova Scotia. So, we certainly, as a government, value the input and the information and the opportunities that working with our stakeholders and working with community groups like Réseau Santé, how we can work together collaboratively to address some of these long-standing challenges in our healthcare sector, including recruitment and retention, and that extends to our Acadian and Francophone communities from one end of the province to the other.
Now, we've just spoken to your caucus colleague, Trevor Boudreau, the MLA for Richmond, and we talked a little bit about the direction in terms of Acadian communities with regards to healthcare professional recruitment. And I do wonder, do you see that there could be an immediate or at least long-term impact for Richmond County? I mean, looking at general practitioners, looking at nurse practitioners. There have been vacancies at the Straight Richmond Hospital in Evanston for a long time. Do you get the sense that this particular program could work with existing programs to not only be able to fill those vacancies to begin with, but to help fill them with French-speaking physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, and others?
Yeah, so I think some of the work that these community groups are going to be undertaking are going to be able to complement each other. So looking at Réseau Santé's work and the website that they'll be putting on, it's going to be for right across this province, right? So, and of course, targeting mental health healthcare professionals, but also looking and welcoming any healthcare professionals that want to call Nova Scotia home. So, we have our arms wide open to any healthcare professional that wants to come work in Nova Scotia. We have so much to offer to these folks that want to call Nova Scotia home. And again, so I'd say that the work that's going to be underway in each respective region, if it's Richmond County, for example, or in my home community in Yarmouth County, for example, these different initiatives that of Réseau Santé are going to be able to complement that ongoing work that community is leading, and that's again, we recognize the value and the input and the expertise that these community groups are bringing to the table when it comes to local recruitment and retention.
All right. Well, we'll hope for the best there. One last question for you, Minister LeBlanc. This is just a general snapshot of healthcare professional recruitment here in Nova Scotia. Obviously, it's a big task, one that your government has put its focus on, but we're seeing even in just the last couple of months, the number of Nova Scotians on the list waiting for a family doctor has jumped from 129,000 to 133,000. So still a lot of work to be done here. What's your take on the progress and success that your government has had in terms of trying to deal with these situations?
I'd certainly say that our government's number one priority is fixing healthcare, no doubt. Make no mistake, that is our number one focus here. We've been elected to govern and to address those long-standing challenges in that system. I mean, this did not happen overnight, and we're not going to get out of this unfortunately overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take money, and the Premier has been very clear about that. But I want to also, flag and raise, the different initiatives that have been announced and rolled out by our government in the last number of months. We look across the province, more mobile primary health clinics, offering points of care for folks that are attached or unattached. We look at the pharmacy clinic pilot that's rolling out across our province to offer, again, a different point of contact of access to primary care to Nova Scotians. We look at our investments in our emergency rooms to improve the flow and trying to deal with, and look at managing lower acuity patients that may be going to our emergency rooms for different reasons and tackling that with virtual means, for example. So there's many initiatives underway and they're positive things, and it's offering, making sure that Nova Scotians are getting the right care at the right place at the right time. and by different healthcare professionals. We're looking at reducing the red tape, breaking down the barriers to make it easier for healthcare professionals that may be coming from abroad. We're focusing on immigration as one stream of welcoming new healthcare professionals to our province. We're working in lockstep with regulatory bodies, for example, those professional colleges. How do we make it easier for healthcare workers to come work in Nova Scotia, but also focusing on different points of care and access to primary care to Nova Scotians when they need it and where they need it.
Quickly, just on that point about immigration streams, in terms of attracting French-speaking healthcare professionals, do you look to France? Do you look to Quebec? Do you look to places like Haiti or African nations? Do you feel like this program could really streamline the specific areas where these professionals are being sought out?
Of course, working with Minister Balser and her team at the Department of Labor Skills and Immigration, working alongside Immigration Nova Scotia, Immigration Nouvelle-Écosse, working collaboratively, exploring all the opportunities and the options that are available to make sure that Nova Scotia is showcased and ensure that healthcare professionals and other folks that want to move and live and work and play in Nova Scotia have that opportunity. So again, we're focused on healthcare. We recognize that immigration is an opportunity and a key tool in addressing those vacancies. And we're committed to moving the needle in the right direction. And we are moving that needle in the right direction.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in a short time, as I thought we might with this conversation. Minister LeBlanc, did you want to add anything else about all of this just before we wrap up?
It's a great opportunity. I really want to commend the leadership and the work that Réseau Santé is doing for our Acadian Francophone community, especially on this file. Like all other of our community partners and stakeholders in the Acadian Francophone community. As minister, it really means a lot to have that engagement and the collaboration and the support from these organizations to help us improve Nova Scotia's quality of life. So thank you.
Well, there's a lot of moving parts here. It's a multi-pronged approach, but we appreciate you taking some time to give us a couple of thoughts about all of this and about this specific direction in terms of healthcare professional recruitment. Minister Colton LeBlanc, thank you for joining us once again here on Telile Community Television.
My pleasure. Merci beaucoup.
À bientôt. Colton LeBlanc is the minister responsible for the Office of Acadian Affairs for Nova Scotia and the minister responsible for La Francophonie. We've been speaking to him at his Halifax office via Zoom. We're going to stay on Acadian topics for the next couple of minutes, and that's partly because Richmond Council spent much of its regular meeting last week discussing items dealing with the heritage and culture of Richmond County. These included the setting aside of $10,000 in municipal funds to be able to assist Association Portuaire du Petit de Gras. The organization is setting up a monument to celebrate the community's heritage, culture, and history, and it's based on several other monuments taking shape in Acadian communities across Nova Scotia. Here is Deputy Warden Brent Sampson explaining why the municipality is setting aside $10,000 for l'Association Portuaire du Petit de Gras and what the money will be used for.
The committee discussed the Administration Portuaire du Petit de Gras for infrastructure grant funds request in the amount of $15,000. I move that Council accept the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole that Council approve the Administration Portuaire du Petit de Gras grant request in the amount of $15,000 to install water and sewer connections as eligible projects and allocated under the drinking water/wastewater categories respectively from the Canada Community Building Fund and taken from the $50,000 tagged under waterfront developments as approved on our 5-year capital investment plan for the 2022-2023 fiscal year.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Could I have a seconder on that motion, please?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Sampson, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? That motion is carried. So water and sewer is not the destination for those particular funds. And in fact, actually, from our discussion this evening, we really talked about the use of the CCBF funds, so formerly called the gas tax, as being kind of not necessarily something that Richmond County has in the past used for water and sewer projects. I'm sure there are exceptional circumstances where that was the case, but we try very much that the utilities support the costs associated with their operation. But the Canada Community Building Fund, one of their priority the areas is tourism, recreation, and so the project in Petit de Gras really just fit the bill. And I know it's a small amount of money in terms of the, typical project that a CCBF, funding application would support. But to know that we are one of a whole network of these beautiful monuments across the entire province, I think is a pretty special designation. And so I'm really proud of the group that put that effort in, and I'm really pleased that council thought it was a good idea to support.
Was that the biggest motivator for council, do you think, the idea that Petit de Gras' Acadian heritage and culture were going to be recognized just as other Acadian communities are around Nova Scotia?
Yeah, I think that's a huge motivator. Like I said, it's a pretty special thing to be part of this larger network in the province, and I think it will bode well for Richmond County in the future for our tourism efforts as well.
Staying on Isle Madame for just a moment, here's another motion that came forward from the Planning Advisory and Heritage Committee of Richmond Municipal Council. This one deals with the possibility of erecting interpretive panels at lighthouses based around Isle Madame.
The committee discussed interpretive panels for lighthouse heritage properties. I move that council accept the recommendation of the Planning Advisory/Heritage Committee to have staff explore funding options for the support of interpretive panels for lighthouse heritage properties on Isle Madame, and further move that staff contact the proponent to inquire on the progress of the project.
Okay, could I have a seconder on that motion?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sean Sampson. Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion is carried. There definitely had been a request for interpretive panels put forward. Generally, I can tell you in principle, it's something we are absolutely supporting, but was just something we needed a little more, information on. And there was some, early discussions around some signage funds that had been landed for one purpose, and seeing whether or not this would be included in it. So stay tuned on that one, I think. Yeah.
According to Warden Mumberket, there's also room for council to investigate the possibility of putting up interpretive panels around lighthouses on mainland Richmond County, if that is the wish of municipal councillors. There were two more motions coming out of Richmond Council's Planning Advisory and Heritage Committee that made it to the floor of last week's regular monthly meeting. They deal with two items involving heritage properties, getting plaques for these properties once they're designated, but also introducing a new set of criteria to make sure that no heritage property gets left behind, and that there's connectivity between the different parts of the municipality that deal with these properties. Here's Deputy Warden Brent Sampson once again.
The committee discussed municipal heritage property designation scoring criteria. I move that council accept the recommendation of the Planning Advisory/Heritage Committee to accept the recommendation from the Eastern District Planning Commission to adopt the municipal heritage property designation scoring criteria as presented, and further move that the Planning Commission carry out the scoring, which can be then reviewed, revised as necessary, and agreed to by the Planning Advisory/Heritage Committee.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Could I have a seconder on that item, on that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Melanie Sampson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? That motion is carried. Well, I think we just would like to have consistency, right? And if I'm recalling the discussions from Planning Advisory Committee, it really was kind of, making sure that staff were confident in providing a recommendation forward back to the PAC, so that, it would be consistent over time, that they had, clear rationale behind whether, why they are or are not recommending something, for heritage designation. And also then that the Planning Advisory Committee can lean on to make a final decision. Because if you do, if you refuse someone a heritage designation that wants one, we feel we need to have strong rationale for that. And so that's why I think the discussion was really about looking at what's the best practice around the province and other areas to kind of learn from those practices.
Are there concerns with the that some properties, buildings specifically, aren't being designated as heritage properties, and you guys are trying to figure out why that is the case? Is that Is that part of this, or is it more about the procedure?
No, I think this is really more procedural and being consistent, and being, making sure that we're authentic in our kind of decision-making process moving forward.
The committee discussed heritage plaques for buildings designated as heritage properties. I move that council accept the recommendation of the Planning Advisory/Heritage Committee to pursue the idea of having plaques made and given to heritage buildings upon designation.
Do I have a seconder on that motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Melanie Sampson. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? That motion is carried.
County staff is going to look into the cost and the process in terms of purchasing heritage plaques for places that are designated as heritage properties and be awarded upon their designation. Your thoughts on the fact that this is happening, or at least could be happening? It's under investigation, but the need for it at this point.
Yeah, I think it's, to me, it's a no-brainer, and I think council and the Planning Advisory Committee sort of felt the same way. I mean, it links right back to our strategic plan, where we talk about, promoting Richmond County as a 12-month-a-year tourism destination. And, if we have heritage properties here, we should be celebrating that, because there's large numbers of people who are interested in those kinds of heritage properties and would like to visit here. So I'm excited about that. It's a small gesture, but I think an important one.
And before we get to our last portion of Roundtable for this week, here is one more item from the Richmond Municipal Council regular meeting of last week. This actually deals with a provincial bill that was introduced with regards to housing development in the Halifax Regional Municipality. Now, you might wonder, what does that have to do with me in Richmond County and the Strait area? Well, Bill 225 was designed to get around a HRM bylaw which only allows for housing construction to be taking place in the HRM between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. That noise bylaw will be violated if need be to allow more housing to take place as a result of this bill being introduced by the provincial government. Well, Richmond Municipal Council's not happy with that idea, so we're going to hear a little more from Brent Sampson, the Deputy Warden of the county, followed by Warden Amanda Mumberket explaining why they're concerned about Bill 225.
The committee discussed the province's introduction to Bill 225. I move that council accept the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to have the warden draft a letter to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, acknowledging that we are confident Bill 225 was passed with positive intentions to address the housing crisis, but that council has concerns about the process and requests that the province consider repealing the bill, which grants ministerial authority to override lawfully established bylaws of the Halifax Regional Municipality.
Okay. Could I have a seconder on that motion, please?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Maloney. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
That motion is carried.
Bill 225, some people would say, well, what does that have to do with Richmond County? But you brought up at Committee of the Whole, it could have plenty to do with Richmond County if there's provincial overreach in terms of what municipalities have the right to do in terms of their own bylaws. Can you tell us how the HRM example could have implications in Richmond and other municipalities?
Yeah, so, Bill 225 obviously came to our attention early on when it was being discussed. And I have to say, I really do feel, I'm confident in the provincial government that the idea around the bill came from a place of really good intention, because we are facing a housing crisis. And so that, the idea that a minister could sort of make a decision to, expedite that kind of work, that sounds really great. And I think it's the right intention, and I would have fully agree with it. However, the process has been pretty seriously flawed. And what it does is it gives a minister the right to basically nullify a lawfully established bylaw of the Halifax Regional Municipality. And there was no consultation on the matter before the bill was adopted, or even drafted and discussed. So that again is a pretty significant. We feel a pretty significant overreach, and we worry that it sets a really dangerous precedent, especially as we continue to negotiate the next service exchange agreement with the province. So we want to just make it really clear clear to the province that we are absolutely interested in working with them on the housing crisis and on matters of all kinds. But it does need to be a respectful and two-way dialogue. Otherwise, all decisions potentially could be made for small communities at a provincial level, and then what would be the point of municipalities? We're here to represent the people in our municipality, and so that's what we're going to try to do our best to do. This particular bill applies to the HRM Charter, which is, doesn't really necessarily directly impact us, but it sets that dangerous precedent that we're really worried about. And we already saw some, what we felt was provincial overreach around the property tax discussion for non-residents in Nova Scotia, and we made a very clear case, I think, to the province as municipalities across the province that those kinds of overreach into the matters that we would consider municipal it's not an acceptable way forward. And I think we can do better if there are more voices and we're being more consultative in our approach.
Just one more on this particular topic. Has it reached the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities level? I'm not just asking this because the president happens to live right next door, but have you brought this up at the NSFM level?
So I can tell you that NSFM is definitely aware of this matter. HRM has been very proactive in pushing the matter, and that's why you're starting to see areas like Colchester, and I think it was East Hants, providing letters to the minister requesting that they consider repealing it. So I'm really pleased that Council has decided to take a similar direction and just encourage the province to find another way of working with us on this particular issue.
And we'll wrap up this week's edition of Roundtable with a look at frauds and scams that are on the go, not just here in Richmond County, but around the world. March is Fraud Prevention Month. Knowing this, organizers in Lewisdale brought in a special guest to their recent We Care Days event that took place at St. Louis Parish Hall. He is Constable Jeff Pierre of the Richmond County District RCMP. Constable Pierre had several things to say about what kinds of scams are out there right now and what people can do if they feel they might be being brought into a scam. So we're going to hear a segment of what Constable Pierre had to say in Lewisdale just a couple of weeks ago as we try to give you some advice on what you can do if you feel that there may be a scammer on the other end of the phone or sending you an email.
Don't send any amount of money. Gift cards, Interact money transfer, money orders, check, wire transfers. I put gift card first. We talked about it before. Gift card situation in small communities. It's a plague. Gift cards originally were made to offer to someone that to purchase an item through a service that they use themselves. You could do it for Visa now. I know MasterCard offers gift cards as well, but most of them, we all know the NSLC gift cards. We all know the Walmart gift card, the McDonald's gift card. There's no business that's legit that will ask you to pay for a service with a gift card. We need to be clear on that. That exchange of money is not made for that. It's made to be given as a gift, okay? Whenever that third party asks you to send a wire transfer for a service, don't do so. Unless you know that person from A to Z, you've known that person for years, you've met that person and you want to send money away, then yes, wire transfer exists for a reason, right? But for a complete stranger to tell you a story and then request X amount of money or request a service, don't go through that. So yeah, money orders as well. I used to use money orders when eBay started. I don't know if people still use money order other than banking transaction, mortgage. No, okay, good. So that's what we have to say. So another point here: do not accept money of any kind. So the reverse is true as well. They'll tell you, we'll give you a lump sum of money. You can pay your credit card, but then in exchange, you have to do this transaction for me. Don't accept that. Money does not fall in windows and on your hands just all of a sudden, okay? I mean, we all wish that we could get our credit card paid off completely by some magical person, but it doesn't happen like that, okay? So if they ask you for a small amount, a small deposit, if they ask you if they're allowed to send a bigger amount, say no to any of them. Okay. Again, do you know that person that you're dealing with or not? And it goes with the judgment that I mentioned earlier on. Are you comfortable dealing with that person? Do you know that person personally or not? Do you know what service they offer? Do you think you really need that service? Do you think you really need to be in contact with that person? Is that person linked to a situation that you heard about a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago? Again, just ask yourself those questions, okay? That one, I get adamant on that because I'm the type of person, know if you're comfortable to deal with door-to-door, telephone, mail, or online solicitation. Learn to say no. That's what it is. Learn to say no. That's how it works. Sales and servicing, there's a little bit of pressure involved in there. Some people are compatible with it, some people are not. Personally, when someone comes up to me and offers me something that I don't necessarily thought I wanted, I feel kind of on edge. Over the years, I've learned to say, hey, I've learned to put it smoothly. Hey, that's a great idea. You know what? Let me think about it. Right now, I'm kind of busy. You have a phone number or card? What's the address of your business? Right? Again, I'm using those questions, right? And if really I'm in a rush, the kids are screaming in the back, and I say no. I say no, that's it. In Quebec, I bought my house, I lived there for 7 years. 2 years in a row. The first year that I got the house, there's a kid that showed up. He was working for a garage, local garage. I've never seen that garage. I know it exists, but I've never seen it. He was selling the service of having, I think, a couple of, for a premium fee, you had a couple of oil exchanges, tire maintenances, and you could leave stuff at the garage if you needed to. Extra warranty on whatever service they offered. He came 1 year, and I was kind of new in the neighborhood. I didn't know how to react. I wasn't sure if it was someone that the people locally knew, and I felt uneasy. And then I told him, look, I don't really have time, but can you come back later on this week? He showed up. I wasn't there. My wife told me he showed up, and because he was in talk with me, she said, come back some other time. He never came back. The year after, the same guy showed up, and I recognized him. I don't know if he recognized me, probably, but now at that point, I was like, you know what? My car is being dealt with at the dealership. I don't need the service. I appreciate it. He was so professional. He knew what he was talking about. He wanted to sell me his service, right? But I still said no. It didn't cost me anything. So that's what I want you guys to remember. Whenever you feel uncomfortable, we talked about gut feeling. Whenever you feel that something is not right, just say no. And if you don't feel because you're too nice, if you don't feel like you can say no, again, use those questions. Give me the information. Let me get back to you. I think next week I'll be available. Let me call back. Just go that way. Okay? We talked about it again, and I'll go smoothly. Do not share personal or financial information to someone asking for it. Okay? Personal, financial information, asking for it. Again, we're talking in the grand scheme of things of a service. Sometimes they'll link it up to something that you already have. If you already dealt with the service, they have your personal information. So there's no reason for them to revalidate that same information. Right? We talked about it again. So talk about a situation, a scam with friends, family member, a close circle. Chances are, if there's a scam happening in a certain region, if it affected you, it's possible that it affected the person that lives maybe 2 or 3 houses down the line from you. Talk about it. If you're not comfortable with it, or you think that it might be a scam, maybe one of your family members is tech savvy and he knows what he's talking about. Do a report, file a report with the police. Talk to another neighbor that you that maybe moved to a different region, see if it's affecting them as well. Spread the word, talk about it. We talked about people being out of country, out of provinces. Whenever they use, you know, I'm in Africa, or I'm in the States, and no, I'm in Quebec, and I need money. We're here in Richmond County, right? We're here. You don't know that person. You don't owe them anything. Read, you know, the fine lines. If you want to put it in the trash on your email, put it in the trash. If you feel like you're in contact with that person over the phone, if you feel like you want to have a conversation with the person, have a conversation with the person. Just ask the questions. But at the end of the day, hang up and don't send any money. Don't exchange any information. Okay? So we talked about also the online chat profiles. So always be wary. I won't say too much on that. So this is just general information that anybody could create. Right now, I could go on Facebook, create a second profile, and change my first name, change my last name, take the picture of someone else, take the picture of someone that I have from my library of pictures that I know, that's not even me, and I'll stick it on that profile. So this is just to give you a perspective that anybody could say anything online, especially on those public websites, chatting websites. Government agency, they do not threaten. Okay, check the information first. So the prime example is CRA, financial institution as well. I mean, when I was working at RBC, there was part of my career that was harder because I was part of the proactive team. And what happens is that we have an automatic dialer that would call the list of clients that we had in the bank. Campaigns for mortgage renewals, that was fun because whenever you get on the line with that person, you could talk about their mortgage, right? That was their product. But whenever you talk to someone that has all of a sudden a car loan with a distant dealership, and then you offer them a credit card, I hated that. I hated that. They had nothing with the bank other than car loan, but then I had to sell them a credit card. Now, a lot of people would be exactly in that scenario and would be like, well, you're really nice. You seem to be a nice young fella, but I'll call my bank, right? They'll call their branch. They'll call their account manager. So essentially, that's the same thing I would advise you to do. If ever you get a phone call related to credit card, related to your bank account, related to a transaction going through, related to anything wrong with your bank account, take your debit card, take your credit card, flip it, call the phone number. You want to take a 15-minute drive, go to the branch, 5-minute drive, go to a credit union, go there. Talk to the account manager, talk to the teller. Pull up your bank book, pull up your statement. Highlight stuff. Don't necessarily just think that because someone tells you something over the phone that it's legit. You're in your rights to verify the information. At the end of the day, the money is in your pocket. It's your funds, it's your money.
And there you have it. That wraps up this week's edition of Roundtable. Thank you for tuning in, and a big thank you to my interview guests this week, Trevor Boudreau, Colton LeBlanc, and Amanda Mumberket. Special thanks to my Telile colleagues, Callen, Cowan, and Nick Boudreau, for filming and formatting the footage from last week's regular meeting of Richmond Municipal Council. You can find all that on our YouTube channel, and you can also find the fraud and scams presentation made by Constable Jeff Pierre. That's available on Telile's YouTube channel as well. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you have any questions or comments about what you've seen over the past hour, or just suggestions for future editions of Roundtable, feel free to contact me personally or to contact Telile Community Television in Arishat. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thank you once again for joining me for this week's edition of Roundtable. I look forward to seeing you again next week with a brand new show. Bye for now.